So, yep.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Good morning.
I'm Sue Whitaker, and my husband Al Reed is here. And we are going to talk a little bit about traveling, because that's one of our absolute favorite things in the world to do. We like to travel everywhere. And let me say, we're going to talk about traveling beyond the U.S. and Europe, but we love to travel in the U.S. and we love to travel in Europe. We just got back from Ireland, as a matter of fact. So it's not that we don't like to travel in those places, but we find a lot of people kind of limit themselves to Europe and North America. And so we want to kind of encourage you to broaden your horizons. So we're going to just talk a little bit today about some other places to go. We only have an hour, and I could talk about it for hours and hours, but you'll be glad to know we won't. But Al is our chief photographer, so most of the pictures you're going to see, and there are some really good ones, Al has taken. There's a few that I've taken. I'm the chief talker, and anybody who knows us will know that that is my role in life. So I'll be telling you a little bit about them. We're going to go through them pretty quickly because we want to kind of maybe get you excited about traveling in some other places. So there's a whole big wide world out there, and let's begin. So the first thing I want to talk about for just a second is why should you go beyond Europe and the United States. Number one, we just find other cultures so fascinating. And while the European cultures are a little bit different, when you start getting into China and Africa and Southeast Asia, now you're really talking different cultures. So that's just fascinating. It's certainly much more different than what you're going to find in Europe and North America. There's a lot to see and do out there in the world, and so kind of hate to limit ourselves. One of the things that we found most fascinating, and I'll talk about that as we go through, is just the difference in seeing it and hearing about it and actually being there. We're going to start with the Holy Land. And you know, we've all talked about the Holy Land. We've all read stories about the boat on the sea and Bethlehem and Jerusalem. But I got to tell you, to actually be there, it's a totally different experience. So it's good to actually experience it in real life. A lot of people worry about safety. We have never, ever felt unsafe in any of the countries that we have been in. One of the things you get used to with travel is you do have to watch out for pickpockets and so on. And we've certainly had people attempt, happily, they've never succeeded. But every attempt we've ever had has been in Europe. We've not had any issues whatsoever in Africa, Asia, anywhere else. So we've always felt very safe. Now in any city you take precautions, you do that in the United States. It's really not that difficult. The flights are longer, and that can be hard. A 20-hour flight is not exactly pleasant. But other than that, language can be more of a problem. But in cities at least, people do speak English. And if you have a guide, it's not really an issue. So we haven't found it to be a big problem. So as I said, I want to start with the Holy Land. If you haven't done the Holy Land, this is a great place to start because there is a lot of European influence and the culture there isn't as different as you might find, say, Africa, China, someplace like that. So we did go and traveled all around the Holy Land on a more of a religious pilgrimage type thing. We didn't just go with any old travel group. We went with, oh gosh, no, I can't think of his name. Elizabeth and, anyway, out of Texas. He's a doctoral level scholar, New Testament scholar, and it was just a phenomenal experience. And here it's just a rock, and it's inscribed with the name Pontius Pilate. And you realize it's not a story, it's real. But that just, for me, that was fascinating. We visited Mount Carmel, where Elijah triumphed over the priests of Baal. And again, it's beautiful, beautiful country. But to actually be there where it happened, being on the Sea of Galilee, it was a cloudy day. The sea was calm, but it was definitely cloudy, and they have the boats that are kind of similar to what you might have found then. And to be out there praying on the Sea of Galilee is just such a unique and special experience. We visited the site of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we were able to actually see the jars where they found them and the caves where they found them, and that also is just amazing. They have found deep down, preserved in the muck, an actual boat from the time of Jesus. Now, of course, nobody knows that was the boat Jesus was in, but it was from that time period. And again, it just makes it all so real. This is looking from the site of the Sermon on the Mount out toward the Sea of Galilee. The same view that they would have had at that time. One of the things I love is that they haven't commercialized it, and you don't have billboards, hey, this is where Jesus was, walk in the steps of Jesus.
No.
A lot of places do that.
They do have a church.
But this place, they really kept like it would have been. And it's just such a religious experience to be there. This is one of the ancient synagogues in Capernaum. And again, you can see things are fairly well preserved because of the very dry climate. But you can actually walk through a synagogue where Christ may have walked. And that's a neat experience. This is supposedly the site of Mary's home in Nazareth. Now, in some of the places, the Orthodox Church is pretty ornate. They're into that sort of thing, and they have made them very, very ornate. I personally am not one that thinks we probably know exactly where Mary's house was. And there are some other things. The site of the Last Supper. I'm not sure we really know what building the Last Supper was in, but I don't get too caught up in that. We know it was there nearby, and you get the sense of what it would have looked like right there. So, you may believe it's actually the site of Mary's home, you may not, but being in Nazareth is just a really unique experience. Now, as I say, some of the sites, to me, they sort of ruined by decorating them up a little bit too much. This is the supposed site of Jesus' birth in Bethlehem. Again, I don't know if it's the site of Jesus' birth, but it is a cave like what it might have been. And to be in there singing Silent Night with the group is just an incredible experience. The Jordan River, of course. We did have someone that was baptized in the Jordan River in our group, and that was a very meaningful experience. The rest of us kind of renewed our baptismal vows in the Jordan River. And of course I brought back some water from the Jordan River so that when Verity was baptized, we were able to use the water. And again, I don't believe there's any magic power in it, but the symbolism and the fact that we were actually there is what to me was really important. It's a beautiful place. And again, they did a good job of not ruining it and commercializing it. This was one of my favorite churches. It was so simple. But it was at the site of the miracle of the loaves and fishes. And rather than a huge ornate cathedral, it was a very simple church with the table and the loaves and fishes, some really beautiful mosaics. But I liked the simplicity of it. To me, that whole thing was so simple with the bread and loaves and feeding the thousands, and it needed a simple setting. This is Jerusalem as seen from the Mount of Olives. And I could just see Jesus there praying, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, praying over the city. And you can see how the Dome of the Rock kind of dominates with that gold, and the city spread out beneath it. Being in Jerusalem, you really can see how it's sectioned off. We walked the walls. You remember Al walking the walls? And they truly were divided into the Orthodox section, the Christian section, the Muslim section, and all of them claiming this mount, Temple Mount area, as sacred to them. And you could really understand more of the tensions. The gates to the city of Jerusalem, and they have lots of different gates, and of course those figure prominently in some of the Bible stories, and it was just so neat to actually be there. This is the Temple Mount, and again, as you read the stories and can picture in your mind actually being there and what that temple looked like, and the outer courts and the inner courts, and where all of the bartering and selling took place. And that, of course, is Dome of the Rock. And it's so predominant as you look out over Jerusalem. You can see why the Jewish people are so very resentful of it, because it's on the Temple Mount. And the Temple Mount is so sacred to them. But it's also very sacred in the Islamic religion. It's a beautiful building. The Western Wall, sometimes referred to as the Wailing Wall. And we were there, we saw people, we saw a lot of the Jewish people praying there, putting their little notes in. And the one day that we were out on our own, there was a big, some kind of Muslim festival or something, and they were parading through, and you could just feel the tension with the Jewish people there at the wall, and then the Islamic people coming through. This is the supposed site of the Last Supper, and again, to me what was important was what that upper room would have looked like. And now, that's what I can picture in my mind as we talk about the Last Supper. The Garden of Gethsemane I loved. Again, it was left as a garden, full of ancient olive trees. And of course, olive trees live so long that some of those olive trees could have been there. And they had little benches around. You were encouraged to pray, but it was just a beautiful, beautiful, peaceful garden where you could go in and pray, just as Christ would have in his time. And we did have communion there, and that was such a meaningful experience to sit in the Garden of Gethsemane and pray and have communion. This is part of the Via Dolorosa. Initially, I was so disappointed in the Via Dolorosa. It was full of, and this picture doesn't show it, but it was full of stalls selling things, and I thought, it's so commercialized. But then when I really stopped to think about it, that's what it was. Christ wasn't marched through a lovely forest path. He was marched through the city, and that's what it looked like. And then it was all right. This is supposedly the site of the crucifixion. I really dislike this. This was a very, very ornate Orthodox church. To me, way overdone, and it didn't set the right tone. But that was my opinion, and for a lot of people, it probably does. This is the site of Jesus' tomb in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and again, you can see how ornate that actually is. There are several sites of the tomb. No one knows exactly where it is. I liked this one better. This is another site, and you can see why I liked it. It's a lot more, it's simple. You got more of the sense of what it might have actually been like in that time. So that's a little bit about the Holy Land. If you ever get a chance to go, strongly recommend it. It's just such an amazing experience to actually be there and walk in the footsteps of Christ, as well as many of the other people from the Bible. Obviously, we couldn't include everything in there. That's just a few pictures of some of the highlights for us, but it is just a remarkable experience. Another place that we went to that was definitely different was China. We traveled for 3 weeks in China, so you can kind of see all the different places we went. China's an enormous country, so you can't really drive around and get everywhere. So we flew into Beijing, and then we did take buses to some places, but we also had to fly various places. And then we also did the river cruise, and that was amazing as well. We really enjoyed that. So, some pictures. And again, you can see how very different this was. This is the Summer Palace in Beijing. It was a summer retreat for the imperial family during the Qing dynasty. And it's now China's largest and best preserved royal garden. It is huge and has all sorts of pavilions and temples and palaces and everything. And you can see the architecture is just so different from what we're used to. These are just more pictures of the gardens. It was absolutely stunning, just stunning. We were able to take a boat ride out on the lake. Just a fascinating place to be. This is Tiananmen Square. That was, of course, the setting for the mass Red Guard rallies back in 1989. The square is very heavily policed. This was the one place where our guide told us to be careful what we said and did, and asked us not to ask too many questions, and if he didn't answer a question, to let it go, and he would answer it when we got in the bus. But that there were microphones everywhere, and it was very, very closely monitored. That was really the only place where we felt kind of that oppressive regime. People were pretty open talking in other places. Our guide was very open in talking. We did have a really interesting guy come and talk who lived through the Cultural Revolution. His parents taught at a university, and of course then they were made to go work as peasants in the farms. He was taken from his parents, sent to a different farm, talked about the conditions and all of that. So they were actually pretty open about things like that and talking about the oppression, but at the same time they were careful where they did it. And being in Tiananmen Square really reminded you. You had pictures of Mao everywhere. We did not go see his tomb. Personally, I wasn't interested, but the line extended for blocks. It's a huge thing. We were able to go to the Forbidden City. And I liked reading. I read a lot of novels and all that take place in China, and you always read about the Forbidden City. It was so amazing to actually be there. It has all these incredible palaces, although most of them you can't go inside, but pavilions and courtyards and gardens and a huge moat. You could actually have naval engagements on the moat. It was so isolated. It's still in the process of being renovated, and they're opening up more parts of it. But the wealth, and just to see all that was so amazing. We visited the HUTONGS, which we rode in the rickshaw, just like that's what they do down in the HUTONGS. They were built many, many years ago, back 1300s, up through the 1400s. And it's full of little tiny alleyways. And these are the residences for just ordinary people. That's where they live. We did go into one, and you can kind of see they're very tiny in the inside. And we met people who actually lived there. The thing that got me was you had communal bathrooms. So the block, there was a bathroom, and you didn't have any trouble finding it. You could smell it. And that's where everybody went. You didn't have bathrooms. Hard to believe that still goes on, in cities. But about half the population of Beijing actually lives in the HUTONGS. But the HUTONGS are really kind of small. There's only about a third of Beijing that is still made up of HUTONGS. But that's where so many of the people actually live. So seeing how they live, they do have electricity and stuff like that. They've been modernized, but I'd like a bathroom. Of course, we had to go to the Great Wall of China. You don't miss the Great Wall of China. That is unbelievable to actually see, and to see how that thing was built. Each of the stone towers could garrison hundreds of soldiers, and the towers were built 2 shots apart. So you'd shoot an arrow from one, shoot an arrow from the other, so they could always get everybody along the way. That's how they decided where those towers were built. It's very, very steep, and it snakes along a winding path across China. We obviously didn't walk the whole thing, but we did walk part of it. But it was exhausting because it's so steep. I hadn't realized how steep it was as it goes up the mountain. But that's an incredible thing to see. We enjoyed getting a chance to really see the culture of China, and I think that's important. We went to a lot of different places. We went out into the rice fields, and we had an interpreter, and we were able to talk to some of the rice farmers. We learned how they make the cloisonne. We learned how they make the silk, and you can see the little silkworms over there. The calligraphy. We went into some of the actual markets where they shop. And that was one of the things I really enjoyed about the tour. One day we went into the markets with a woman and bought food, took it back. She showed us how they cooked the food to make the Chinese dinner. We had dinner with the family, visited with various people in the apartment complex. So you really got a chance to kind of talk to some of the people there. And that was a lot of fun. Our guide was Mike. He showed us how to do calligraphy and wrote all our names in calligraphy. I can't imagine writing that way. Shanghai was one of my personal favorites. It's unbelievable what they have done. You can see...
Is it 20 years too?
Yeah, in 20 years, all these buildings were built. And they are gorgeous. Gorgeous, all along the river. We did a boat tour at night to see all the lights. It's just phenomenal. It made you see what you can do in a totalitarian regime. I'm not promoting a totalitarian regime, but when they decide that's what they're going to do and make everybody do it, it's unbelievable what they've accomplished in a very short period of time. Shanghai, to me, was a gorgeous, gorgeous city. We also went out to Suzhou, which is an older city. It means plentiful water. It's kind of the Venice of China with all of the gorgeous canals. It's 500 years old. It's a city of silk gardens and canals. It's the one that inspired Marco Polo when he wrote about his trips to China. It's part of the Silk region. And so we rode through the canals, which were just beautiful, visited some of the gardens, learned about making silk. I really liked the way they did the gardens. They don't use a lot of flowers. but they use a lot of water and a lot of rocks and greenery, and they are so peaceful, but just gorgeous, gorgeous gardens. We went on a cruise down the Yangtze River. The pollution in China is horrific, and you'll see some of these pictures. You can see how the deep haze that hangs over everything. And they talked about the fact that there were a lot of days where the kids couldn't go out and play because the pollution was just so bad. But it was absolutely stunning along the river. As you can see, lots of little tributaries that flow in. We went to one of them, along one of the tributaries where one of the minority tribes in China lives, and saw how they lived fishing. And that again was fascinating to see some of the minority cultures. The scenery in that gorge was just unbelievable. And there the air was so much more pure than it was out on the main river. And I liked the monkeys. Of course, panda bears, you gotta go see the panda bears. Pandas don't do much, they sit and eat and sleep. But they do look so cute. And of course we went to see the terracotta army. That is unbelievable. And they have the workshop open where you can see them and how they piece together all those terracotta warriors. Oh my goodness, talk about a jigsaw puzzle. But every one of them is different. They were all handmade, every one of them different. And they just go on and on and on, absolutely forever. They had the museum with the horses and the chariots, all in battle formation, ready to guard that tomb. They have 3 huge pits that have been uncovered so far. There's more. All of them full of these terracotta warriors. We did go and visit a school, which is always interesting. We went to a 5th grade class and spent some time with the children working on their English. So as a teacher, I really enjoyed that, and I did taught them some English, which was a lot of fun for them. And a lot of fun for me. I really enjoyed that. Xi'an, the ancient city, they had taken one of the old bomb shelters and made it into an enormous shopping center. That was kind of interesting to see the old bomb shelter. The city walls were phenomenal. We were able to get up and walk along those, which was really neat. We loved the Chinglish. They're really trying to work on that now, but some of the signs were just so funny. Sometimes you really couldn't figure out exactly what they meant. But, you know, when they were trying to say no walking, it's no striding. Deformed man toilet. That did not quite translate right. Stop and fall down carefully. We just started taking pictures and collecting them because they were so funny. But it goes to show, you know, just some of the differences. Translation between English and Chinese is not easy. We went down to Guilin, which was a beautiful place, and Al and I wandered off on our own and went to the Cave of the 7 Stars. The tour was all in Chinese, so we didn't understand a word, but it was absolutely gorgeous. And then, of course, we got lost, and no one could talk to us to tell us how to get out of there. But somebody did have a map, and we kind of pointed and we managed, so that was a good thing. This was Guilin at night. Just spectacular, the way they light things up. And then we did the cruise on the river, the Li River. And again, that is an absolutely beautiful river with beautiful scenery. Just very different than anything we've seen in any other country. And we ended up in Hong Kong. And so here we are up in Victoria Park, looking down on the city of Hong Kong. The food in China is interesting. Chinese food in China is not like Chinese food in the US. It is so oily. Pretty much everybody ended up with diarrhea. I think because we're not used to such oily food. I tried so hard to take things that weren't oily, but at the end my plate was always full of oil. So the first night we got to China, we went out to eat and we had this amazing Chinese food. It was so good. And we were all raving about the wonderful Chinese food. And our guide said, here's how it's going to work. The first week it's, oh, this Chinese food is so good. The second week it's, ugh, more Chinese food. And the third week it's, dear God, where is McDonald's? And you know,
Guess what?
we went to McDonald's in Hong Kong, and Al still says that's the best burger he's ever had.
Yes.
But we did get awfully tired of the Chinese food.
Yes.
Chinese food does not, and over there doesn't have the meat that we have in our Chinese food. It has some, but not much. And it's just, every meal had watermelon for dessert. I mean, every meal. And you always seem to have the same thing, Kung Pao chicken and those bamboo shoot things, and it did get very monotonous. And yeah, our digestive, pretty much everybody had a little trouble with that, so take your Imodium. But other than that, it was great. The religions were so interesting to me. We visited Hindu temples, we visited Taoist temples, Confucianism, and in so many cases, everything was just a big mix, which was very interesting to me. This one is, it's very, the Taoist was quite popular. It's very ritualistic, a lot of magic, a lot of different gods, a lot of talismans, throwing the sticks, things like that. But it's all, to me, religion is a big part of culture, and it was fascinating to go to the different temples of the different religions and see what that entailed. And this was another just beautiful, beautiful pavilion. So China's a great place to go to. So different than anything we have here. And we thoroughly enjoyed that. Another place we absolutely loved was Egypt. Egypt, of course, when you think of Egypt, what's the first thing you think of? Pyramids, yeah. And they are amazing. Just actually see the Sphinx, see the pyramids. I was always fascinated as a kid with Egypt. I loved studying Egypt as a kid. And the idea that I was actually there was just incredible to me. I remember sitting one afternoon up on, we were doing the Nile cruise, and sitting up there on the boat out on the deck, sailing down the Nile, looking at the ancient temples, thinking, I cannot believe I am actually here. That was just phenomenal. So Al and I went on our own to the pyramids. Had a little issue. We missed our flight to Egypt, and so we missed the first day of our tour. So we did this part on our own, and that was amazing. One of the most amazing things was the people, though. They were so excited to see Americans. We did this right before the pandemic. Happily, we made it home before the pandemic and everything closed, but there weren't a lot of people traveling. And I joked about it. I felt like I was some kind of rock star because all these people came up and wanted to get their picture taken with me. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. My favorite one was a group of 3 boys. They were probably 12 to 14 years old. And they desperately wanted to get their picture taken with me. So, fine. Yeah. Okay, so we did. And they gave me their Facebook page because they were going to put it on their Facebook page. Them and their American friend. So, you're okay, I'll be your friend. But interestingly, men never, ever, ever approached. 14 was about the oldest of a boy approaching me. A lot of young girls and women. Many of the women were heavily veiled, they were very shy, and they'd watch me for a long time, and I'd smile and wave at them, and then they'd come over and ask if they could get their picture taken. So that was interesting. This is the Great Sphinx with the pyramid in the background. Is that not just iconic Egypt? And we just sat there for a while going, we're here, we're actually here. And of course, having missed our flight, it was even more amazing that we were actually there. We did a cruise down the Nile, and you can see Al and me sitting there relaxing and enjoying life. Al would have his Turkish coffee, right, Al?
Yeah, that's why I didn't have any clothes.
And then just seeing the little towns, the true towns, not just the big cities. And a lot of times kids would come out in their boats, they'd paddle out, and they'd be down there waving and yelling up and talking to us. And then they would throw things up, like shawls and things, wanting us to buy them. And then we would supposedly throw the money back down. They were very trusting. That was amazing to me when we went to the pyramids. Our hotel called a cab for us, somebody who spoke English. And he took us there. And I went to pay him, and he said, no. He said, you just pay me when I come back and get you. He told us where to meet him, and we told him what time. Now, can you imagine that happening in our country? And then he was there when we came back. He just trusted that, of course, we'd pay him, which we did. This is the great temple of Karnak. It was, one of the things I loved most about Egypt was everything was in such remarkable condition. In Europe, so many of the ancient Roman structures were so damaged, there's not much left. But the temples are, I mean, it's just astonishing what good shape. But it was all buried in the sand. And even the colors and stuff in the tombs, you just don't get to see that in Europe. So that was just unbelievable. This is the temple of Luxor. So we visited a lot. I mean, this was from 1400 BC. Can you imagine? Just the antiquities, the huge courtyards, all the columns. The entrance is over 200 feet high. This one was in celebration of Amun and Mut, his consort, and also the temple of Karnak and Luxor were connected with the Avenue of Sphinxes, and they had parades through all of that. So just seeing all that was phenomenal. Again, we spent time with the culture, seeing how they made the alabaster. We loved going to the night markets. So hot, they do a lot of their shopping at night. So they had these amazing night markets, the spices. Oh, you could smell them. They were so amazing. Perfume. We went to perfume factories. We learned how they made glass. We saw how they made papyrus. We watched the belly dancing, the whirling dervishes. So you really got to experience some of the Egyptian culture, which was cool. The Valley of the Kings, I loved. We were able to get down into the tombs. And as you can see here, they're unbelievably well preserved. Most of the buildings and everything that you're going to see in Europe, all the color is gone. There are a few sites in Pompeii where a little bit of the colors remain, but in the Valley of the Kings, the incredible colors are still there. You can see what it actually looked like, the carvings on the walls and the stories, many of them from the Book of the Dead. This was King Tut's tomb, and so we were able to get to go down into King Tut's tomb, and you can see Al there. And they do still have the actual stone piece that was there, the gold death mask, and the stuff at the bottom, that's from the Egyptian Museum where they moved it to keep it safe, but all of that was in there. It's just one layer after another of these gold tombs. Absolutely phenomenal. The Colossi of Memnon, and I wanted to get people in there so you can see how huge they were, and they carved these things way back. They weigh 720 tons. They're 60 feet high. They were completed in 1350 BC. Amazing. And look at the condition they're in. This is the temple of Hatshepsut. She was interesting. Her husband died. She wanted to be king, but she couldn't be king because she was female. So she convinced everybody that she'd been reborn as a man. And then she became king. It worked, and she was actually considered to be a very good king. The temple is actually built back into the hillside. And again, you can see the condition that it's in. It's amazing. These are other temples, Edfu, Kamombo, Philae. And then we had a big party, and we partied like the Egyptians. And that was a lot of fun because it was a group of Americans and then a big group of Egyptians. And we couldn't talk to each other, but we had a lot of fun dancing together. My favorite temple was Abu Simbel. That's actually 2 temples built by King Ramses back around 1200 BC. You have the 4 colossal statues of Ramses there in the front. Those are absolutely amazing. What's really amazing, though, is that when they built the Aswan Dam, the temple was going to be flooded.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the temples that they actually took apart, numbered every block, moved it, and put it all back together. So that is quite an engineering feat. The temple was carved out of a sandstone cliff, and so that's what you've got there. It was rediscovered back in the 1880s, and again, the insides were amazing, and so much of the interiors are just in beautiful condition. That's the Alabaster Mosque in Cairo. Some mosques you're not allowed to go in, but we were allowed to go into this one, and so that was interesting. We had just finished studying about the Islamic religion with Marie, and had been to services with the Islamic services here in Harrisburg, but those were more the European Muslim. So it was very interesting to see the difference with the Egyptian Muslims. There is a small Christian community in Egypt, maybe 10%, but most of Egypt, of course, is Muslim. We found Egypt to be just a fascinating mix of the ancient and the modern. You have these very modern skyscrapers, and then the camel comes down the street in front of the modern skyscraper. You have the horse-drawn wagons and all the cars. You can see the picture of traffic. I would never drive there. They have lanes, but no one pays attention to them.
You see a third lane here.
Yeah, they make their own lanes. There aren't traffic lights or anything. Traffic just kind of goes. Yeah, it was rather terrifying at times. The people were wonderful, and as I said, they were so excited to meet the Americans. And as you can see, you have the modern, and you have the very, very traditional. And then the last place we're going to take you to for just a minute is Africa. We're not going to do South Africa because I think Jack Keane already did South Africa, but we loved South Africa. I'm actually going back this fall. But this is Kenya and Tanzania. Absolutely stunning. The Great Rift Valley.
Lucy.
And Lucy, yes.
Yeah.
I learned all about Lucy in school, and I couldn't believe it when we went to the National Museum, and there was Lucy. To actually see the skeleton. They had a lot of the ancient hominoids there. There were a group of school children visiting there, and they were whispering and pointing at the two. They were clearly Americans. And finally, it's always funny to watch and see which brave kid actually approaches you. Finally, one of the brave kids approached us, and they'd been learning English, so he was practicing his English. Hello, you American? So we had a good time talking, and his teacher's like, don't bother them. We were like, no, we're teachers, we love it. So we enjoyed that tremendously, just being able to talk to the kids. To see the wildlife, you can't ever go to a zoo again. They're nothing like they are in a zoo. I mean, you think about if you put a person in a cage, you get neurotic. Just unbelievable. I loved the giraffes. I mean, they tower up over the trees. It was just incredible. And the elephants, we absolutely loved. And I mean, you get so close to them. It's such an experience. The rhinos, water buck. I wish I could remember. Do you remember what those are called?
No.
It starts with G. But they stand up on their hind legs and eat off the trees. I love those. Those were so cool. And look at that. I mean, look how close we are to that lion. They really do sleep most of the day. And there's Daddy Lion. And the females. This is my favorite picture, and I got that picture. I have to take credit. Actually, this is the male and female lion, and they have a certain day where they have mate, and when the woman's tired of it, she just starts smacking him around. And I was able to get a picture of that, which I thought was pretty cool. Pretty cool. And the water buffalo, they look so menacing.
They are.
Yes, that is true. That is so true. We saw all the big five and more. The leopard, and you don't usually get that close to a leopard, but we were able to. The cheetah, we were able to see the cheetah after his hunt, which was pretty cool.
All bloodied.
Oh yeah, definitely bloodied. Look at the build on that thing. The cheetahs.
Elon.
Yep. And the hippos. Al discovered he has a gift for hippo calling. He was good. He could stand there at the edge of a river and call the hippos, and they'd come. And of course, we enjoyed watching the baboons.
Baboons, yeah.
And actually seeing ostrich. We were able to see part of the Great Migration in the Masai Mara. That was a very, very cool experience. We went on a night safari, which, again, you get to see more of the hunting and you get to see some different animals, which was neat. This picture up here in the top corner, you could see these lights off in the distance, and our guide said, that's Little Nairobi. And I thought, oh, okay, Little Nairobi. Well, as we got closer, we realized it's the eyes of the millions of wildebeest in the Great Migration. And so he was telling us, it looks like a city out there as the light reflects off the eyes. That was an amazing sort of thing to see. But seeing the animals at night was very different. And we did get to see some things that we didn't see during the day. The accommodations were fascinating and interesting. We stayed in a mud-type hut, but they were very luxurious. Our little mud hut had beautiful tile floor and bathroom and everything. The luxury tent was, I think, one of my favorites. It had a teak hardwood floor. I called it my princess bed, but a huge bed with all the netting and everything. And they'd come wake you up in the morning with tea and biscuits. It was great.
Good old British influence.
Yes, you can see the British influence.
Lord.
Yeah, there's some of the interiors. You were not roughing it.
No.
You were not roughing it.
Had Wi-Fi too.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
They did turn the electricity off at night, but we had a guy with us who used a CPAP machine, so they left electricity on, and that was nice. Well, again, one of the best parts was spending time with the people. We visited Samburu village as well as a Maasai village. I enjoyed, they were doing a little schooling under the tree.
For the tourists.
And so we went and spent a little time there. Their huts, I don't think I could live in those. They were made out of sticks and cow dung.
Yep.
And boy, you could smell them a mile away. But the people were wonderful. It did crack me up though. You'd see the men out with their cattle in their traditional Maasai garb, talking on their cell phones, living in their hut made of sticks and dung. So you have such an interesting mix now of the ancient and the modern. The women, in many cases, walk for miles to get water, and that is a huge part of their day. And one of the things we really enjoyed was just being able to go and talk to them. One morning, Al and I were up early, and we had walked down to the river, and they did have guards posted around to keep mainly the elephants out. You don't think about that, but elephants are probably the most dangerous. And he was a Samburu. And so he was able to speak English, and we just sat and talked to him for quite a while about life as a Samburu. And to me, that's one of the highlights, is just being able to talk to some of the people. Zimbabwe and Botswana, Al and I did do an elephant safari, which was pretty cool. They had a cheetah that they'd found, his mama was dead, and they raised the cheetah. They tried to get him to learn to hunt and go out in the wild, but they couldn't. He was still a wild animal, but he was used to people, so we were able to spend a little time with him and even pet him. Victoria Falls is amazing. You can't get a picture of it because it's so huge.
Thank you.
But we enjoyed walking all along and seeing Victoria Falls. We did a sunset cruise on the Zambezi River, and again, you're sailing down the Zambezi, and we were just looking at each other going, can you believe we are sailing down the Zambezi River with the hippos sailing right along with us? It's just just such an experience. I love that picture of the hippo. And alongside us, you have the locals.
There's crocodiles in that river.
Yes, I
Oh,
wouldn't
yeah.
be out there.
Yeah.
One of the highlights was a herd of elephants came down to the river and played, and just watching those elephants play. There were two young males that were feisty, and they were learning to fight. So they were fighting each other, and you could just see the matriarch watching them. And then when she'd had enough, she blew that trumpet and stepped out of the water and started walking off, and boy, everybody just followed her. Wish my kids behaved that well. But that was just, the kind of thing you'd never see otherwise. The lions, seeing the lions out in the wild is just, we were able to watch the lions hunt, remember that?
Mhm.
And watch them as they surrounded this poor little, I think it was a zebra, and sneaking through the grass. They did not get him, however, he escaped. The leopards, we loved watching the leopards. Didn't Al get some amazing pictures? So look at that, good timing. Those are just some of the places. We went to Southeast Asia, which is amazing. Costa Rica, Peru, those are great places in South America. I haven't gotten to Brazil, Chile, and Argentina, but that's on the list. And Japan's on my list, but I haven't gotten there yet. I have a long list. The problem with the list is every time I go somewhere and check one off, I add 3 more. Because you meet other people who tell you, oh, you have to go here, oh, you have to go there, and they get you all excited about it.
Sure.
So I hope maybe today we've got you a little bit excited about possibly expanding your horizons and traveling to some other places. It's really not hard. I thought traveling to Africa, that's going to be a hard trip, we need to get that done while we're young. We missed that, didn't we? But it was not a difficult trip at all because so much of the time you're in safari vehicles. So definitely great trips. I can't wait to go back to Africa again in October. I hope I can keep going back.
Cool.
Any questions? You should.
I